Coming up on this week's episode of Hip Hop Now podcast, it's Sleepers in Catalog Part 2. Let's do it.
Welcome to Hip Hop Now podcast. If you're from the future, you know what to do. Get your ass out of here. Don't disrespect the legend. Hip hop is here to stay. Let's get right into the business.
What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now podcast, a podcast specifically designed to keep you caught up on all things hip hop, music, and culture that happened throughout the week. This is a bonus episode of Hip Hop Now podcast. But first and foremost, before we get into it, big shout out to those who have been listening to Hip Hop Now podcast for 10 years, because 2026 is the 10th year anniversary of this podcast in audio form, by the way. Audio, okay? Not video. Video's kind of new. But shout out to you and shout out to those who have been watching on YouTube, right? Hip Hop Now Pod. I appreciate the subs. Definitely make sure you hit that like button. Definitely hype the videos you like. But probably most importantly for this episode and episodes like it, become a member. Now, to become a member of this YouTube channel is in the description of this episode, so all the details about it are there. Essentially, it is to support the podcast by donating to the podcast, whether that's a super chat or you become a monthly member, and all proceeds received on this podcast go right back into the production of this podcast. You're not going to buy my next bottle of Blands, okay? You're not going to buy me albums and stuff like that. Or pay for my clothes or anything, right? It's strictly about going right back into the type of content you are interested in, right? From this perspective. So again, shout out to those who already have become members, and today might be your opportunity to become a member and receive special access, timed exclusive access to episodes just like this. Now, back a couple of months ago, I did a Sleepers in the Catalog episode, right? And essentially what it was me talking about albums within an artist's catalog that I feel people kind of sleep on. And one of the reasons why I feel like people sort of sleep on these specific albums is because they're just better albums in the catalog that people are more tied to, that maybe at some point they fell off listening to this artist's music, or they heard a single or a record, or they stopped checking, whatever it may be. But I'm here to tell you they got some heat, and you may be overlooking the album or two. So let's get right into this list. And again, this is part 2. So I'll make sure to link part 1 so you can check out those albums in this episode. But first up, The Game. 1992 is the name of the album. It was released in 2016. There were 13 tracks or items, because, sometimes there's skits, 53 minutes in length. This album, well, let me just say this about Game first. Game's catalog is slept on in general. I think his antics have somewhat to do with that, right? Whether that, and that's a lot of different things, right? Nothing about really the music and the rapping, but more about what he does outside of that, right? What he says, certain activities before he became a rapper, some things he did after, right? Putting out diss records towards like Eminem and Kendrick and getting ignored, right? It just makes it seem like, why would I listen to a new project from Game? He's lame. But you know what? they lied. He's not. I'll just say this before I get a little bit deep into this album. I wasn't the biggest fan of the documentary because of the name dropping. It was almost like, yo, this cat is just like a straight up fan rapping. Like, who is he as a rapper? Because all he did was name drop. And then he dropped Doctor's Advocate, and I was like, okay, this is a little bit better. And some name dropping happens in rap in general, but it was like on a documentary, it was like that's all he did. And then as he started to release more albums later on, I was like, yo, this dude is really dope. And I feel like people are somewhat sleeping. And one of those records that was slept on to me big time is 1992. I've talked about it on this podcast before. It's an album that Game essentially just took everything that was going on in 1992 and made it the concept for this album. And from a West Coast standpoint, so from things with Bloods and Crips to the Rodney King situation to OJ Simpson, right? Like everything was here. And if you were around in 1992, and especially if you were watching OJ get chased by the cops on the highway live, the Rodney King situation, the fallout, the riots. Even if you were into West Coast, early 90s West Coast hip hop culture, like I was heavy on the music side, but then there was also films like Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society. And think about it this way, like you think about a game like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas that plays off of that early 90s West Coast vibe, lingo, everything. Game put together a fantastic album. I don't even say I don't use words like that. I usually, it was hot, lit, whatever, fire, whatever. Fantastic album about all the things I just said. And it opens up with a track called Savage Life with, they use a lot of like audio from back then from different events. It's just one of those concept albums that you get into it and you kind of like, especially from a nostalgia standpoint, you kind of like, damn, this is dope. But even if you weren't around you wasn't born or you wasn't listening to hip hop in 92 or whatever, or any of the things I mentioned, this is just a artist taking a concept, speaking from a perspective of somebody who grew up in that world around the 90s. And what's also dope is the album cover, I believe, is the same artist that drew the album cover for Doggy Style, which dropped in 1993. So again, The Game, 1992, I think incredibly slept on album in his catalog. Next up, Outkast, Idlewild. I know. To some people, the last Outkast album was Speakerbox, The Love Below. And to some people, Idlewild, the movie, was hot garbage. I don't disagree with you on the second one. The movie was not great. In some ways, it kind of feels like Sinners Before Sinners, but I'm just saying. But it just wasn't really that good of a movie. But the soundtrack, we're going to talk about it, right? So Idlewild was released in 2006, would be the 20th anniversary of this album. So definitely a time for you to check it out. There were a ton of songs. I think there were close to, what do we have here? Like 14? Wait, I have duplicates on here, which messes things up. But skits, everything like that, or whatever. Sleepy Brown appears on his album. Dude named Scars on his album. I think that's it for features. No, Snoop Dogg and Lil Wayne was on a track called Hollywood Divorce. Janelle Monáe was on here. Killer Mike. Yeah, I forgot about some of these. Macy Gray was on here. Macy Gray, I believe, was in the film also. But I'll say this. If you watch the movie and didn't get through it because it was trash, I get it. If you didn't watch the movie, but you heard the movie was trash and ignored the album, I get it. But if you didn't watch the movie, or you like the movie being tied to the soundtrack, I don't think the music is bad. The music is excellent. And the only reason why I say this is because, again, it's like the Stepchild in the Outkast catalog. It's quite literally the last Outkast album, and it wasn't necessarily whack. And I say this because when you look at Outkast's albums, right, none of them sound the same. Each one has a different vibe. Southern Playalistics doesn't sound like AT Aliens. AT Aliens doesn't sound like Stankonia or Aquemini. Speaker Box and Love Below don't sound like anything. They don't sound like each other, and they don't sound like anything else they released. That's the same thing with Idlewild. It's a clear vision of the blues, right? I guess some Biloxi blues too, a little bit of jazz, but it's not all that. It's really like they took the vibe of a juke joint, right, from back in the days, and they just did it Outkast style. And I know maybe for some people that didn't work. Maybe they didn't want to hear any harmonicas, but you've heard them before in Outkast music. You can't say you like Stankonia or something else and then say, well, yeah, I didn't like when they used this. Like, this is what they do. Outkast had basically a techno record in ghetto music, and I loved it. At first, when I heard it, I was like, what is this? But it wasn't all that was on the album. And again, Outkast just provides a variety. So I feel like if you're a big Outkast fan and somebody told you Idlewild, the movie, was whack, I agree with it. But if someone told you all of it was whack, I disagree. The soundtrack is banging. It is. So check that out. Next up, Little Brother, Get Back. Now, I call this a sleeper only because, generally speaking, when people talk about Little Brother, they talk about the debut, The Listening, and the follow-up, The Minstrel Show, right? The Minstrel Show being my favorite album from Little Brother. But Get Back was the follow-up, I believe, the follow-up to The Minstrel Show. And this is when Ninth Wonder left the group, so to speak, right? I think he might have provided a beat or two for this project, but he's not on the album cover, so he wasn't a part of the trio like he was with the first two albums. And this album was released in 2007, 11 tracks, 49 minutes. Features included a couple of people, I believe, but Lil Wayne was on here for sure. Carlita Duran was here on a couple of records. Darian Brockington was here. A couple of people on here, but that's not the point. The point is what I said. Every time people think about Little Brother's catalog, and I'm not talking about super fans, they only think about those first two albums and maybe Separate But Equal, like the mixtapes and stuff like that. But when I heard Get Back, I was sad prior to that. Like, damn, Ninth not in the group no more. What is this going to be? But then when I heard the Get Back, I was like, oh, we just going to turn it up a little bit. That's all we doing. You know what I'm saying? So when I heard this album, and this is when I was really going heavy with my being in the gym, and a lot of times I would just, to get through workouts, I would just listen to music. This was like a go-to for me. Like the track with Lil Wayne, Breaking My Heart, is so ill. Like, it's a dope joint. Good Clothes is like a typical, this had to be Fonte's idea. Typical, like, let me put on my good clothes. Typical Fonte type track for Little Brother, or Little Brother type track, to be honest. So many dope records on here. But again, I just don't hear enough people talking about this one in particular. I thought it was dope. Now I get it sometimes. Like I said with the Outkast situation, if you stray from a sound that people are comfortable with and a formula, meaning 3 members of the group as opposed to 2, some people feel like it's never the same. You know what I'm saying? Like they would have preferred to know that Ninth did all those tracks and Ninth is on the cover with them. But I'm telling you this, if you like Little Brother for beats and bars, when you listen, it does not matter. The record is dope. So check it out. So here's an album that admittedly I slept on, but I slept on probably within the same year it was released, which was 2005, and it's Snoop Dogg's Rhythm and Gangsta, R&G, The Masterpiece. And it was sort of like Snoop's version of I'm gonna make a album for the ladies and the players, right? But not so much on some, not Father MC style, you know what I'm saying? But Snoop style, right? Something that's not necessarily just gangster or hard edged. And I think around 2005, this is after Snoop is off No Limit, I believe. Yeah. The Last Meal was his No Limit record. But this probably would have been considered a double album back then. It was released in November of 2004. 20 tracks on here, but some of those are skits. 1 hour and 18 minutes. Now, I will say this for this album. There are songs on here that I skip. And I'm not saying that the other albums I, went through them, straight without skipping a record or two I didn't like. But on here, there's some strong records, and then there's some that's kind of like, whatever. But the strong records are strong on here, right? And if you're wondering, like, well, what's the standout single off of this album, which is what you call it, Drop It Like It's Hot. That was the standout single off of this album. But there was so much more here, and I think when Snoop went to No Limit and that first album was like Snoop rapping over No Limit beats, and it just wasn't the same as him being on Death Row, I think people just wrote him off album-wise at that point in time. And even when he was still on No Limit, Master P was able to recapture that sound by bringing in Dre and more West Coast production, especially on The Last Meal, which I think is also kind of slept on. Or maybe it's not slept on. I think most people know. If you know, you know. But as Snoop continued to drop albums like Paid the Cost to Be the Boss, and records like that, and then Rhythm and Gangsta, I think some people were sleeping and they just heard the singles. This album, like obviously Drop It Like It's Hot is dope, standout record. I love the song Ups and Downs. Like, I love it. The Business is cool. Let's Get Blown, produced by Pharrell, is my joint. Like, yo, again, this album, my bad, I almost pressed play on this. This album, again, if you looking for Doggy Style Snoop, no. You got the wrong album, fam. That's not what this is. If you're looking for Beautiful, right, which it wasn't on this album, but was produced by Pharrell, like that kind of Snoop rapping over beats that feel like that, and again, Drop It Like It's Hot is on here, so not all of it sounds like that. But in general, if you were looking for an idea of what the rhythm part, right, of this R&B sounding album is, that's Beautiful is one of those examples. But it's a dope album, and I think it's one of the slept on albums in Snoop's catalog. And lastly, now here's an album that I've definitely talked about before. Raekwon's Shaolin versus Wu-Tang, released in 2011. 17 tracks, 49 minutes. this was the album. Well, let me say this real quick. Features included Method Man, Ghostface, Spectre Deck, Estelle, Busta Rhymes, Jim Jones, Nas, Raheem Devon, Rick Ross, and Black Thought. Yes, all those people were on this album. And also, this was the follow-up to Only Built for Cuban Links 2, right? He had released that. People were back on board, like, yo, Ray is back. And he released this album right after that. And I felt like his momentum was going up after that. Because now this wasn't a sequel album. This was a brand new album with a ton of dope features. But yet somehow it don't get talked about like that, right? And I'm talking about like most people loved Only Built for Cuban Links 2. So when he announces a new album, Shaolin versus Wu-Tang, which is a title reminiscent of the roots of, you know, Raekwon and everybody, Wu-Tang, I was like, okay, let me listen. Oh, Lloyd Banks is on here also. I'm like, let me listen, right? And then you look at the features. The features work. All the Wu members are here, right? Ghost is on 2 songs, but then there's also Nas is here and a couple of other features. What could go wrong? Well, people just slept on it. People didn't listen. Standout records on here for me. Shaolin versus Wu-Tang, it sounds like it was lifted from a Wu-Tang album, right? Silver Rings with Ghostface, Ray and Ghost doing what they do best. I think what might have killed some of that momentum was the fact that the lead single was a joint called Butter Knives. And I felt like that title and the record just being okay made some people feel like, oh, he going backwards. But it's not true. It's not true when you listen, right? Rich and Black featuring Nas. If you said tomorrow a Nas and Raekwon album was coming out, right? Mass Appeal, you hear me? Imagine that. Exhibit A, okay? Exhibit A. Those two sound, I know y'all want Nas and AZ, but Nas and Raekwon would be crazy. I'm telling you. Go listen to Rich and Black. Hook is crazy. Beats crazy. Nas is stellar performance by Nas. You know who else had a stellar performance on here? And you probably wouldn't expect it because maybe you're a hater or, you know, he with the police or something like that. But the song called Molasses featuring Rick Ross and Ghostface Killer. Rick Ross verse is crazy. He in pocket like, yo. I'm like, when I first saw this lineup and I was like, okay, Black Thought, that makes sense, blah, 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 it makes sense. I'm like, Rick Ross? I don't know. Nah. Rick Ross get busy on this. And again, this is one of those albums where, unfortunately, because Ray had, you know, he had slip up early, right? He released Only Built for Cuban Links in 1995. Classic, all-time classic. It's Raekwon's Illmatic. But then he dropped Immobilarity, which was such a drop-off, a steep drop-off, that most people are like, oh no, like it's over. He really only had that one in the can. And then when you see how popular Ghost was as a soloist, some people even start to say without Ghost, Ray albums aren't that great, which is not true, right? Immobilarity was trash. But Lex Diamonds was dope, but people were kind of sleeping on it because it didn't say Purple Tape, right? And Immobilarity to them was just like, I can't do it. Too much time has passed. I can't do it. But again, coming off the heels of Only Built for Cuban Links 2, and you drop this, and most people are like, okay. Again, I'm not calling any of these albums classics. I'm just saying, if you're a hip-hop head and you're a fan of any of these artists, but you either don't know these albums or you didn't hear them or you were kind of skeptical, you're sleeping. Wake up. and check these joints out. What do you feel about these albums that I mentioned? Do you like any of them? Maybe you have a very good reason for why you thought it wasn't that good. Leave your comments in the comment section below. Like the episode because that definitely helps me out on YouTube. Again, subscribe to get more content like this. Hype the video. Become a member to get timed exclusives just like this. And remember this much. Say it all the time. I'm not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.